look at serial killers, we can recognize in them like, man, I would do that too if I could get away with it. We'd never acknowledge it, largely. Usually we would just say, I don't know, I'm just interested in them. Well, we're interested in things that speak to us. In other words, there are things that tell us some things about ourselves, that talk about our lives, and we're interested in them. And that's because they speak to the darkness inside of all of us. We all have it. We all have darkness to some degree, some more, some less, but we all have it. And that tells us that it's just part of what it is to be a human. The one that strikes me, I was talking last period, the numbers will be off a bit, but you'll get the point. I was reading an article a few months ago about a battlefield that was discovered, and I want to say it was in Scotland, if I'm not mistaken. And the way that they discovered it was they were building a highway that was going to cut through there. In a lot of countries, before you can build stuff like that, you have to do what's called a ground sonar excavation, because some areas of the world have so much history. So, for example, you can't even dig like a water well, for example, in Israel, without first getting permission, because they have to do like a ground penetrating radar to make sure there are no artifacts down there, because there's so much history in some of these countries. Scotland and England are like that as well. So they're going to build this highway going through, and when they used their radar, they found bones, human bones. So they're excavating it, and they found thousands of corpses, well, I guess bones, remains of bodies down there. And so as best as they were able to put together, there had been a battle there 1,000 years ago. And I want to say it was something like 5,000 people died. It was a lot of people who were killed there. They found a lot of bodies. There's no written record of this battle. They only know the time period because of the swords and shields that were buried with the people, some of the artifacts they found like that. But other than that, there's no record of this battle ever being fought, which means that it wasn't like a pivotal thing where the whole kingdom hinged on this one fight, or even like one castle hinged on this one fight. It was just a fight. It was just a battle. Didn't seem to change history at all, except of course for the people who were killed. And when you die in combat today, you bleed out. You get shot in the head, all of a sudden it lights out. Things happen pretty quickly. You get blown up. You're knocked unconscious. But those kinds of fights, man, those are like face to face, eye to eye, hand to hand, man. Like you're not just killing people. You're having to beat people to death through their armor, if they even have armor. But you're having to, it's really gruesome. It's really ugly fighting that goes on there. And so you think about the people who were there, and they fought, they suffered, they died, and it made not one damn bit of difference in all of history. It's all of those things. And you think about over the course of human history, how many people have lived and died, and it's incredible, and yet we don't even know who they are, even in battles, you know? So think about history here in this case, because typically we think of history as the one who's actually being written. In this case, what is history doing? History's not being written here. What's history doing? Turning the page. Isn't history usually on the page? Don't we usually say like we go through history, we read through history? Here, history is reading through us. It's different. It's an inverse here. And so if you ask that question, well, why would history be reading through us? Because, well, geez, why do people read? Especially historically. What's that? Entertainment. So all of this madness, chaos, mayhem, devastation, it's entertainment to history. That's all it really amounts to. It amounts to entertainment. You think about why we read, about World War II, World War I, the American Revolution, Civil War. Typically we read these things not because we think that, we want to know what the battle lines were. Usually it's because we're fascinated by the amount of death and destruction that happened. We like to read about the Roman battles because we're fascinated by the death and destruction that happened, and that's kind of what they're getting at here. History is really something that's reading us for entertainment, and we're just playthings, not really important characters, just incidentals. This is about as pessimistic of a quote as you're going to get. this year. This one was actually introduced last year because my 5th period class, which I liked a lot last year for some reason, they wanted some stuff that would be darker because they'd gotten a lot of like happier stuff, and they saw some stuff that the seniors were looking at. So they all, can we get some dark stuff? So this was the first dark quote that we looked at. Then they just kind of cascade from here. And it's interesting because they were fascinated by the idea of reading more dark stuff. And that's because there's a tendency in us as humans to tend towards the darkness. That's the stuff that's more interesting, it's more entertaining. And if we ask, why is it more entertaining? There's actually a really good reason for it psychologically, which is that it's the part that speaks to us about parts of ourselves that we're not supposed to speak about. Like, doesn't it seem strange to anybody? Anybody in here like fascinated by serial killers? Doesn't it seem strange to us that some of us are just fascinated by, they do the worst possible things, and yet we're fascinated by them. We're fascinated by criminals. We're fascinated by people who do the worst possible things. And if we ever ask why, which we should do, we should ask ourselves, why am I so fascinated by fill in the blank? It might be purely academic. You might be interested in it because of just, as an academic thing, but I think what you're going to find largely is that we're fascinated by these things because they are us. For example, you see a serial killer. What is it that a serial killer does that we wouldn't do if we could get away with it? Okay, I wonder how many of us, something to ask yourself, if there is somebody or if there has been somebody in your life who, if you could have gotten away with it, you would have killed them. Like if you knew 100% I could get away with this, that you would do it. And if so, then you have to recognize that there's something in you that, I don't want to say it the wrong way, but understand what I mean when I say this. You just don't have the courage to do it. And I'm not saying you should. I'm not saying, oh, no guts, do it. No, don't murder. Don't do that. But understand that the thing that's stopping you from doing it is not me telling you not to do it. It's that you don't want to go to prison. You don't want to get the death penalty. You don't want to spend the rest of your life in jail. That's really what it is. And so when we look at when we look at serial killers, we can recognize in them like, man, I would do that too if I could get away with it. We'd never acknowledge it, largely. Usually we would just say, I don't know, I'm just interested in them. Well, we're interested in things that speak to us. In other words, there are things that tell us some things about ourselves, that talk about our lives, and we're interested in them. I mean, if there's a song, for example, that talks about San Diego and this is where you're from, then you're more likely to be interested in it, to listen to it. Some of my favorite songs, I listen to them, I'm like, there's 2 songs I'm thinking about off the top of my head that talk about Los Angeles. So I'm kind of like, predisposed to liking it. The things that speak to us, we're predisposed to being fascinated by, because it teaches us something about ourselves. Something that we wouldn't normally talk about, something that we wouldn't normally tell people about, but we're absolutely fascinated by. This is why, I don't know how many of you, if you are fascinated by serial killers, you've watched multiple documentaries about the same person. And you might be like, well, it's different information. Very rarely, man. Maybe like 1 or 2 new pieces of information, but you'll sit through an 1.5-hour documentary to get 1 or 2 new pieces of information about a person you'll never meet and has been dead probably for a while. If so, that tells you that there's an obsession, there's a fascination. So again, the question becomes why? Why am I fascinated by that kind of a character? And that's because they speak to the darkness inside of all of us. We all have it. We all have darkness to some degree. Some more, some less, but we all have it. And that tells us that it's just part of what it is to be a human. It's part of what it is to be a human, to have that darkness. Anybody into, I don't know, like Old West outlaws? Anybody ever hear of Billy the Kid? I'm fascinated by Billy the Kid. Billy the Kid was the dude who it was said he murdered 21 people by the time he was 21 years old. He didn't kill that many. And I will say, Billy the Kid did nothing wrong. Many historians will disagree with me. I don't think he did anything wrong. I think he was doing it for the lulz. He didn't rob banks and do stuff like that. He was an outlaw in other ways. But I can look at it and say, I don't know, I'll tell you more about him later. But this was a guy I could look at and just go, wow, it's like me running around the Old West. It's exactly how I think I would have been. It's how I would have imagined I would have wanted to have been. Except for the whole dead at 21 thing. That was something a bit different. So yeah, we're drawn to those things that we feel a connection to. There's a reason that we like the Padres if we're from San Diego, and we like the Giants if we're from San Francisco. There's a reason that we like music that mentions our hometown, and there's reasons, therefore, that we're also drawn to some of the dark things that we're drawn to. Because all of those things reveal some connection between us and the subject. So in this case here, history is drawn to itself because of history's into it. History loves the chaos and the mayhem and the devastation. Same reason that we're drawn to it. No difference. The only difference is that we prefer when we're on this side of the page. We don't like it when we're the thing being read about. Questions? Comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques? Happy Monday, huh?